Kasturi, are you ready as well?
Yes.
Lovely. So good afternoon, everyone. It's 2 o'clock, and I welcome you to our second Engage of the year. The first one was about a month ago. This is our second. The third is coming in about a month. The Engage is a national webinar and platform for engagement with thought leaders. And today, we're very fortunate to have Professor Behari-Leak with us, and I'll introduce her in a minute. Just a few greetings I want to send out. One is to Renata in Holland, to Daniela and Carmelita at UCT. Lovely that you are here. That's really great. Bess in Pretoria, Saloshni in Durban. So there is a few faces we're very familiar with, and that's lovely, lovely having you here. I'm going to admit 2-3 people that were coming in fast and furiously. There gets a bit of a bottleneck right at this point. Greetings also to Monita in the Free State and Denise and everybody who's here. You are welcome, and I hope you enjoy the next hour. You will get recordings of this, of course, and you will also get the PowerPoint presentations that our guest speakers will present to you. Just a quick one in terms of housekeeping. It is recorded. You know that tomorrow you'll get the recording and the PowerPoint presentations. I'm now going to introduce our guest speaker. It is Kasturi Behari-Leak. Kasturi, can you put your camera on so we can see you? There we are. There we are. Professor Behari-Leak is Associate Professor at Higher Education Studies at UCT. She is the Dean of the Center for Higher Education Development, DHET, at UCT. She leads a national collaborative project focused on academic staff development to support and enhance professional development. She served as a co-chair of the Curriculum Change Working Group at UCT. She served as the president of HELTASA for many years. She was the president also of the ICED, which is the International Consortium of Educational Development. She teaches at postgraduate level, convenes HELTASA's university staff doctoral program, and contributes to various national and international research consortia. She serves on research advisory committees and publishes widely. So today I'm wearing 2 hats because I usually host the Engage. As you know, over the last 4 or 5 years now, we've hosted the Engage. But today I'm also going to be a speaker here because we are focusing on professionalization and what it means when we think about professionalizing higher education. I was about to say aspects of, parts of, or all of, but when we think about what it means to professionalize higher education. So today we will have Professor Behari-Leak and myself speaking a bit later. Kasturi, are you good to share your screen? And Patrick, can we please spotlight her? I welcome so many people here. We have over 112 already. We had over 300 almost 350 registered. Those who are not here, get the recordings sent to them. So that'll work very nicely. Tandy Lewin has just arrived, which is lovely. So there's a whole batch of very familiar faces. Yeah, that's great. Kasturi, you're on mute.
Thank you. Can you see my screen, Bridget?
Yes, can see your screen. If you can put it on to presentation mode, and then Professor Behari, we are delighted to have you. I'm going to switch myself off for a bit. Thank you very much. Got about 20 minutes today for her, and then I'll do about 20 minutes, and then we have a good 20 minutes for a discussion. So I look forward to that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Birgit, and thank you, Helm. The Engage series, I think it's a really wonderful opportunity to be able to respond to the question. And I think it's such an important question you've asked. What does professionalization of higher education mean? And what kind of profession are we envisaging when we talk about this professionalizing? So that question has spurred a series of thoughts in my own mind, because I've been wholly focused on, in my own career, in the professionalizing of higher education teachers. so academics as university teachers. But the discussion and the focus on this has now expanded my thinking also into all the stakeholders in higher education, student services, professional staff, etc. How are we enabling the professionalization of all players so that we are able to offer a far better, iteration of the academic project and its related and associated activities. So thank you once again, and I'm hoping that I'm able to provide a little bit of input on work that I've been busy with, but to respond to you, Birgit, later in terms of the bigger question. So when I think about professionalization of higher education with a teaching focus, I think that it has been a core commitment of mine, simply because I see higher education as a mechanism for transformation in the sector. Transformation in the national landscape through education and higher education at that. So I think it is an important platform that we all use in order to shape the way young people, old people, scholars, knowers, learners, students, etc., interact with the world through knowledge, with their sense of practice, with their sense of being, and their commitment to increasing and expanding the way we think about the world. So to put firmly on the table then, I think that any professionalization in higher education must take into context the trends, the higher education debates and discussions that are happening currently, that, it has its own legacy, and that anybody working in the sector has got to have an understanding of where we've come from, where we are right now, and where we're going. So that is closely linked to the purpose of higher education. I think we can't ignore what higher education is trying to do both nationally and globally. And it begs the question of identity. So in the various domains in which we work, who are we? And what are we able to do with who we are? I think it's very important, the question of who we are, but also who we are not. So the flip side of that is to understand what commitments do we come in with? Why are we here and in not any other institution around the country? Do we understand the student success journey, and what is our contribution in that journey? So our own identities as professionals, as academics, as support staff, they're very closely linked to the project of higher education, because one can't excel or bring their best value to the job if one doesn't find alignment between what we are doing here and who we are as people. Now, I raise the issue of who we are as people because in the last 10 years or so, it has been very important to recognize who is in higher education, whether it's on the student side or the teaching side or the professional staff. It is important to acknowledge that higher education is immensely, intensely diverse, and that each of us comes with a very unique background and context and cultural capital, social capital, which we use invariably, even in invisible ways in the work that we do. In the past, before the Rhodes Must Fall movement, it was more difficult for us to bring that level of discourse into the discussion of teaching and learning. But I think it's far more enabling now for us to understand representation, belonging, inclusion, and what this means for teaching and learning, and what this means for students' ability to thrive and succeed if they are well held and well contained as they journey forward. So context, and I know it is a kind of cliche almost, context is key to the professionalizing of higher education. If we, and maybe it's a debate, a discussion point, do we teach the disciplines, the courses, etc., in ways that contextualize the work we're doing in this country, on this continent? Does it matter if you are teaching the discipline in the same way, whether it's in the north, the east, the south, the west? One could argue, well, you know, that's just knowledge. It's not entwined, you know, with how you think about it. It's objective knowledge. But we know from everything that has happened in the past, recent past in the country, knowledge is not value-free. So even in thinking about teaching science and mathematics and physics, it's value-laden. It's about where those disciplines originate. It's about what they're trying to achieve and who are the real students in front of the university teacher in the class trying to engage with a discipline that might seem at face value far removed. So in contextualizing what we do, whether it is teaching or whether it is working in the registrar's office or whether it is working in the financial departments, we can't escape the fact and should not escape the fact that the finance manager at a university, although using the same financial principles in the work they do, cannot operate in the same way as they would if they were working at Standard Bank. There has to be a difference in the way context affects what you do and how you do it in the different places and spaces in which we show up. So contextualizing professional learning is really important because what it means is it also surfaces the systemic challenges that are in the higher education sector. So to focus overly on, let's say, the teacher in this case, as we have done in the past on the student, is to mask the real issues that might be sitting underneath the challenges we face. And it is to assume that if, you know, teachers are professionalized, all our problems will go away. Now, many people will remember that this is the kind of deficit discourse that we don't want to continue in terms of student learning, and certainly don't want to pick up in terms of professional learning of teachers. So professional learning is but one part of a bigger, more in-depth, complex system that really needs to talk to the components parts together if we are able to make any headway in terms of advancing the sector. So when we talk about contextualizing, we're talking about space and place, the historicity of the university, past, present, future, the historicity of what you're teaching. Where do those disciplines come from? Where do we teach? What's the spatial arrangement? And how is that affecting power dynamics? We've got 26 universities in the national landscape, but we also have institutional differentiation. Comprehensive universities, universities of technology, research intensive. What does that mean? What does that kind of differentiation mean for the context in which we work? We need to understand how culture and personal concerns play out in the context as well, and how this affects the way we professionalize. So another reason why I think context is important, and here we're talking in the broader scheme of the academic role, and as I said, I am talking to the academic role in the main. The role of the academic compared to 20 years ago has evolved and changed dramatically in the last 5 years. It feels like we are doing everything everywhere all at once. that it's no longer just about teaching and learning, but it's got to do with funding. It's about adding to policy development and frameworks. It's about leadership in various aspects, social responsiveness, etc. So that role is growing and burgeoning. So what it means to professionalize when the academic job description is now so huge is something that the sector, university management, what we need to think about in terms of just how wide that spectrum is and what the ambit will be. How much can we professionalize when the sector itself is in dynamic flux? So coming to the professionalization of teaching then, I have spent a lot of time with professionalization of new academics as teachers. And perhaps the one thing I say to them in terms of mitigating some of these discourses you see on the slide, the main one being for them feeling like caught between being a novice and an expert at the same time when they enter higher education. So they're certainly experts in their fields and how they have researched and where they've studied, etc. But when they come to higher education, it's as if they know nothing. They're novices, and they've got to manage that tension between being new and being, deeply involved in their disciplines at the same time. So what is quite sobering is for people to understand that when they decide, of all the institutions out there, to sign up for a role and appointment in higher education, this, in a sense, is a second profession. So they come in with the disciplinary profession or the field of practice profession, but higher education is certainly the second profession that each of us, needs to take on board. So when you look at the professional disciplines, and let's take architecture as an example, it's very easy sometimes for new lecturers in architecture to enter the university classroom as if it was private practice, as if it was a studio, as if they were operating in industry. Now, here, the seamless transition from industry into university seems like, without constraint and difficulty. The difficulty is that there is a big difference between being a practicing architect and an architect teacher. That gap between what it means to teach, what it means to hold the space in your classroom for learning to happen, might be very different from what it means for an architect to address a problem, find the solution, and implement it and execute on it. So that transition of understanding that my second profession has to do with understanding how the discipline works in a different kind of context and situation is actually what makes a difference between engaged teaching and learning, inclusive teaching and learning, and a kind of teaching and learning which sometimes can happen as if there were no students in the classroom. So the transition from novice to expert is critical in the professionalization of higher education teachers. New academics will also tell us that when they enter, and for a long time afterwards, they suffer from an imposter syndrome, not really knowing whether they fit in, whether they belong, etc. And for me, I think that has a lot to do not just with how they are inducted, but how they are held by their departments, how the university as a bigger, larger entity finds a space to acknowledge what they bring in, to really tap into their talent and to support them in the transition from into higher education. So one can't think about professionalization without looking at what's happening in the higher education landscape. In the last 10 years, we came through a huge expansion of our thinking through the Roads Must Fall. movement. Then we went into the COVID years, and that was another huge expansion in terms of platforms and delivery and online spaces, etc. Most universities are very geared towards a future orientation. What are we going to do in the future? How are we preparing for crisis or challenges, etc. So professionalization also has to take into account what's happening in the country and what's happening in the world. One has got to find the capacity to be able to engage in those discussions. Those are not just academic discussions. Those are important social discussions. And I think that the university must enable those spaces to happen, the dialogues to happen. Professional staff, student services, academic teachers, all need to be involved. This is not just the area or domain of academics alone. How do these national and international issues influence the way we do things in university, and how are they affecting the ability to achieve the outcomes that we've set for ourselves? So the national discussion is important in the professionalization. Now, in terms of university teaching, again, I'll bring attention to the way we were disrupted quite acutely in the 2015 moment, but that disruption was actually quite productive in that it enabled many people to make great strides in terms of expanding not just the knowledge base, but understanding how students relate to the knowledge. Again, if this is not part of what it means to be a professional in higher education, then I think there is a gap, a serious gap. So it's very important that while these debates and discussions are happening, they do not exclude anyone who is employed, who is part of the university system, because at various points, if you're looking at an example of a student on a student journey from the time they register to the time they graduate, it's not only the university lecturer that they come into contact with. There's administrative staff, registration staff. So people at the university are engaging with students all the time. Sometimes we find that while academics might have the benefit of expanding the way they practice and who they are, sometimes other staff who are not in the know might have a different take on how to respond to students, how to understand some of the cultural differences, etc. So it's very important that professionalizing takes the entire university along as part of its own mission to make sure that people are, wherever they are placed, are part of an inclusive practice as higher education. So I want to just highlight a few ideas here, which are taken up in my next section. I just want to say that, in the teaching arena, these are certainly focal points that we've taken up in a national project, which I'm going to talk to just now. So I want to draw attention now to a specific case study, if you like, of a professionalizing higher education teachers project, which tried to enact and embrace some of the principles and ethos that I've been talking about. In 2018, the DHET produced a national framework for enhancing academics as university teachers, and this was after quite a broad consultation process. And the very interesting thing that came out of this is identifying various stages in the career trajectory where, specific bespoke interventions are needed to support academics, in this case, university teachers, to professionalize, right, as part of the higher education mission. Now, the project I want to talk about has got to do with new academics transitioning into higher education. And it is an example of how we tried, as a steering committee and a group of 20 university participants, to actually implement some of those ideas through a collaborative project nationally. Our key focus was that context matters, and we are very interested that the induction program for new academics, as part of a professional learning expansion, had to be theorized and conceptualized well. So this was in perhaps not opposition, but in contrast to the usual kind of induction processes that occur through HR. I think HR performs a very important function, but the gap when it comes to inducting the university teacher into the classroom is a really onerous one if one thinks about what a new lecturer, early career academic has got to do without, you know, in the classroom with large numbers, no experience, no prior experience, no understanding of the higher education debates and discussions, and with no formal induction into the whole sector. So this project called NATEP looked at critical realism and social realism as a theorized framework for thinking about induction. And the assertion we make through the project, it's not just professionalization, but a critical professionalization or development that is needed. And by critical, we always mean not to criticize, but to link it to the deeper issues of power and material resources, and how do these things talk to some of the challenges and opportunities we have in the sector. So critical professional development not only locates the staff member, in this case, a university teacher, in the context and the national context, but it's also raising awareness and understanding of what it means in this country, I'm using as an example, what it means to be a South African working at a university who has to understand the legacy of where we've come from and the vision for where we're going, notwithstanding all the systemic challenges that people face on a daily basis. So visions of the NATEP project, you know, incorporated various interventions that we were trialing. For example, the cascading model of staff development. We were very interested in foregrounding agency in new academics. We were interested in the historical and systemic challenges, etc. So we didn't see induction as a welcome and here's the university. These are all the wonderful things that the university can do. You've now been appointed. Please take your laptop and you're on your way. I know that is oversimplifying, but we see induction as a very deeply engaging process of conceptualizing and understanding one's role. So part of the professionalization has got to do with understanding your role in the bigger scheme of things and how does that role actually contribute to the broader objectives that higher education has in place. So when the project started in 2018, it had a gap slightly in the COVID years, and we are in the process of completing it with a launch of a book that really encapsulates some of the learnings, some of our offerings, some of the implications for staff development and professional development in higher education. I won't go into the details of the project cycle, but you know, suffice it to say that each of the 10 participating universities have created customized, conceptualized, and theorized induction programs for their universities, which they are busy implementing. And what is at the what is foregrounded through these induction programs is to be alert to the systemic challenges, to understand what the context means, to engage fully and clearly and closely with our students, and to see how we could work best as an ecosystem. Some of the outcomes of the project, and these are two offerings to the sector and to the field of scholarship, are 4 pedagogical layers that emerged as part of our engagement. And this has to do with engaging in a holistic way, understanding the being and becoming, how do we use our teaching endeavors to generate knowledge, and how does this contribute to transformation and decolonization? The second offering from the project is our own version of the critical framework. And we highlighted and identified key nodes that really affect the professionalization and the induction of new academics. And as you can see on the slide, these have to do with conceptual and contextual awareness, being responsive, being relevant, being legitimate, etc. So the project really, each of the university partners really tried to enact this in the induction programs they created. And so on the 29th of October, we will be coming together after a year or so for this launch and for the completion of what we think has been a successful project and has a lot to offer, I think, the professionalization discussion and debate in the country. Thank you. Perfect.
Thank you so much, Professor Behari-Leak. I'm going to steam right. I'm going to go right forward and start my presentation. I would like everybody who's got questions for Kasturi to please note them down. We will have 10 minutes or so at the end. And I must just say, Kasturi, why your presentation is just so spot on. And what triggered it really was for this discussion was your national research project and the literature that is coming out of your research on what it means to professionalize the teaching and learning domain. So thank you very, very much. It was really because of your work that we have this engaged now. So thank you very much. So I'm going to take about 15 minutes and speed a little bit through it. Here, I hope you can see it, and I hope that works well. You can see it. We're looking at professionalization of higher education, and in my domain, I shouldn't say my domain, but in the domain that I've been particularly active in is, of course, student affairs, is the administrative, it's the support domain of higher education, very much in leadership and management, but not in the academic domain. So I'm going to take us through I'm going to make a note when I start, otherwise I'm worried about not keeping to time. I'm going to take us a little bit through the purpose of why we professionalize, what the premise around that is, some concepts, and then a research project we did, and I hope to end with some recommendations, which I think we need to take up at a national level. So why really do we professionalize? And of course, here the question we start off with, is there a question around optimizing? Do we need to optimize the performance of staff in higher education? Do we want to set in place some gatekeeping functions? Who's in and who's not? Who decides who is in and who's not? Would it help if we professionalize? Would it help with quality assurance? Would it help with a better achievement of our goals? The question is, why would we want to professionalize? To whose benefit? Why is this a good thing? What is the purpose? Then the question is, who would professionalize it? Who decides? Is it ourselves, people in higher education, or is it perhaps a professional body outside? Is it a governance body outside? So again, who is the driver of the professionalization process? And then the question of how would we do it? What does it look like if we were to professionalize, and what kind of form does it take? So those are some of the questions we would need to think about if we do want to professionalize. And I know Professor Behari-Leak has already spoken about the idea of the university, and she is perhaps not as optimistic as I am as the university, how it has changed over time, how the process of reconceptualization of the university, of what it represents, has changed over time. So it's become it's moved away from the site of training, from a site of simply transmitting knowledge, to a site of being participative, a site that seeks to be relevant, that is inclusive of people. So it sets itself as a place of liberation, where we recognize that knowledge has the power to liberate, to empower. And I'm quoting here from Bell Hooks, who many of you know from her book, Teaching to Transgress. She speaks about the idea that education is the process of transformation of the self. So it's a process of becoming. And we often say that when our students come to university and when they leave, they're not just 3 years older, but they're 3 years different. And that is what we mean by becoming. Something happens in that process. And of course, higher education, they're massive challenges. And I just want to recognize them, because I think professionalizing within the domain, one has to be very aware of the tensions outside of or in the context. And one of them, of course, is the complexity issues of how Barney and VUCA governs the way we engage and manage higher education. Polycrises govern our lives in universities. Of course, the idea of a global social justice contract is there, and we know in the form of the SDGs, as imperfect as they may be, but that is one of the challenges. We need to achieve a global, social justice living and learning space. Higher education is also challenged with expansion. It needs to expand in certain areas. We need to have better access, more success. The global north, global south is an issue in many issues, in many areas, but particularly because the global north tends to export knowledge sets, and there are challenges around that. There are geopolitical issues and AI and so forth. Let me see that I can move on. Here we are. So then let's move on to student affairs. In this domain of higher education and in the challenges that I've just listed, what then is student affairs? And you see some literature here. Is a book that I've edited with Roger Lideman, and the middle one we've written with the Boston School of Higher Education. And there is a whole monograph on just what it means to professionalize across the globe, and what do these professionalization efforts look like in student affairs. And it's a very interesting book, if anybody's interested in that. And now I'm going to go into the idea of what is student affairs. And I think a lot of us see parts of it, and they're not quite aware of the entirety of what student affairs is and what it means. And so this sort of picture represents that. And student affairs has a number of definitions, and here you see some. It has to do with the context where many factors play together. Students are recognized as participants, as responsive citizens that need to promote social justice as part of what their critical thinking is about and their agency in the world. Smith in 2019 spoke about the breadth and depth of the scholarship of student affairs, and Martin Mandu already in 2003 in South Africa spoke about the medley of functions. And so it goes on, and you will get this presentation, and I'm speeding on a little bit. 2 years ago, as part of a research consortium with Thierry Luscher and Brett Perosi and Lisa Bardil, we looked at the changes of student affairs across the globe since COVID. And here you see the model that we've come up with in terms of student affairs mediating efforts, in terms of mediating the personal domain of students, mediating the socio-cultural domain, mediating and impacting on the academic faculty domain, and of course on the public domain. So all these slides just to show you what student affairs is. And here particularly for the visual learners here, you see that if we recognize the context, and Kasturi was already saying perhaps it's overused, but indeed, of course, it's the most determining part of a student's experience is the context within which the student is learning, be that distance education, be that a home that perhaps has difficulties around finances and so forth and so forth. So again, the context within which student affairs is embedded, or into which student affairs is embedded, you see here the macro context with national development agenda, political economic context, social welfare, or the accessibility of social welfare in the public sector, cultural norms, and so forth. Then student affairs is influenced by the kind of university into which it is embedded or where it is active, what kind of university it is, and again, the kind of student that is enrolled at that university. Again, that is important. And here I want to quickly cite a study done by Lusha and Wilskut on this Journal of Student Affairs and what the voices of the student affairs authors, scholars, and practitioners have brought forward. So Wilskut and Lusha looked at the past 10 years of the Journal of Student Affairs in Africa and asked how is the profession represented, or how is the voice of student affairs professionals, how does it shape the idea of the profession? And they looked at 19 issues, 240 publications in the journal over the last 10 years. And they concluded, and it's a wonderful paper, and I really want to encourage you to read it, and they concluded that student affairs professionals themselves speak about the high-level knowledge, skills, and quality standards.
The uniform for tomorrow.
I know, if we can just mute that person, yeah. Also, that there was a focus on the service to students and professional values, that they are internal to the practitioner themselves. And that's very much what Professor Behari-Leak mentioned earlier on, that the identity and the being and the internal values of the practitioners or the student affairs staff at university has a massive impact on how they are engaging with students. And in the final sort of words, Wilskut and Lusha also said that in the analysis, or the analysis reflects a very strong social justice discourse in student affairs. And again, I'm saying this is because ultimately we have to think about what student affairs is before we even think about professionalizing it. And here I want to just cite Celia Whitchurch, who speaks a lot about the third space, that student affairs is wedged into the intersection of management, students, academics, and research. And that third space in higher education is where student affairs is often perhaps quite invisibly wedged and located. So just for 2 minutes, I want to take you through a research project that we did about 2 years ago to ask what development needs are in the sector, across the institutions. And we did a survey to ask what kind of professional development would you need if we were to design one. And we consulted with experts, we had a reference group, and we asked the survey across the institutions, and we had 362 people reply to this survey to ask how they would want to have their development needs met. The publications, 2 publications came out from that, and you can see them here. I'll leave the reference is in the PowerPoint here. But then what is really, really interesting is when we asked, what domain are you working in? It wasn't entirely clear. There was a whole bunch of very diverse people coming forward, speaking, saying, I'm in student affairs. And you see here from student support, it goes all the way into student services, research officers, residences, registrars, all the way to bursaries and NSFAS. And all these respondents felt that they were in the domain of student affairs. And you can see what a medley, to go back to Martin Mandyu's words, what a medley of professions and focus areas this is. The majority of people who replied were in mid-level management. So we had some entry, some senior, but of course the majority were at mid-level management, and that's quite interesting. We asked them about their needs around their competencies, what important competencies needed to be developed. And again, you can see that in the publication. For now, suffice to say that one of the key questions was about their research, and how research and scholarship is such an important part of student affairs. And I'm quoting here from Pollard, who speaks about the pernicious dichotomy of separating research and scholarship from student affairs, and how that really undermines the domain, which is so pivotal for student success. What came from that research is, of course, that University South Africa went on to design a professionalization course, and here you see a picture of that as it was in the media. Before we designed the program, we also looked at, I'm looking at time, I know Tandy had written a comment in the chat. we looked at the programs across the world, and some programs are more useful for us to learn from than others, or some higher education in areas are more useful to learn from than others. And I'll make a comment about that in a minute, what I think are useful areas for us to learn from. In essence, if we were to shape a more kind of pervasive and really sector-wide professionalization program, we need to think about that as a development, that it is about the stages. There's no stage of finality, but there's a progression that we would want to emphasize. We want to emphasize competencies, epistemologies, and that there needs to be, or there is, we rested on the disciplinary and scholarly knowledge that we have about this domain. We would want to set certain criteria that delineate or that map out a process of maturation of that professionalization process. And in that, there is an epistemic community that then can ultimately has a claim to a profession. There are various models of professionalization, and I know Professor Behari-Leak has already spoken about it, and some are more useful than others. I've just got that slide here for interest's sake. What I think one needs to be careful of, and here's some caveats, is that one needs to be mindful that we don't import models and frameworks from the global north. And by, so I think the areas, for instance, like Kerala in India has a lot to teach, or Mauritius has a lot to teach for us. And I'm not sure that us leaping towards certain parts in the global north is a very valuable way of going about it. There are asymmetries of knowledge, of how old these knowledges are, how widely they're disseminated. And it's important to find our own voice in that. And it's quite difficult to do that when other voices are already occupying the space. In the design of such a program, one needs to look at renewal, reflection, and scholarship, and think about how relevant and decolonized, and I use a decolonized term here in terms of liberating oneself from voices that exist in this domain, particularly from the global north. Here you see there's a bunch of programs already existing. University of South Africa is doing programs. Sarua is running programs. We know that DEES in Germany is running programs, and SASAB is doing professionalization. These are just the professionalization courses next to the masters and PhDs. And perhaps a last word before my last slide, that I do think there's an artificial separation between the idea of support and learning, and that somehow we need to be wiser and better about merging those two. And my last slide, because time, there we are, my last slide is, where do we go with this? My recommendations that I think need to be taken to heart when one thinks about a professionalization is that we need a national framework that speaks about the idea of student affairs. What is student affairs? How do we define it? What is its purpose, its vision, and so forth? There needs to be role clarification and differentiation within that. If there is a national capacitation opportunity, the difference from doing it local at a university as opposed to national, the national bears a lot of advantages that, that we don't have time now to speak about, but we do need to, I think the national is more worthy than doing it in institution specific. The domain student affairs needs to move beyond compliance and obedience to management in a sense, and beyond service provision towards strategy and vision. What is the vision for student affairs? How does it want to position itself? Who is it accountable to? And there needs to be an autonomous voice, and then some leadership coherence. There you are. I've sped right through this. I was very, very fast. You are welcome to get these. You will get this presentation afterwards. So now we have 10 minutes, 8 minutes for quick questions. Thanks very much. I'm going to look in chats if anything. Yes, somebody speak. There we go. We're going to mute that one. I see a comment from Dr. Lewin. Tani, do you want to have a quick word and ask that question?
Sure. Hi, Birgit. Hi, everyone. Really, the question is just about how many people don't actually ever sort of formally become professionals in the permanent sense. So people who are professionals are, I mean, 60% of our academic staff are temporary. It's a global thing anyway, it's not just South Africa, but I think we tend to design our programs, and this critique, my colleagues have been critiquing this in terms of what we've designed as part of DHET programs as well, part of the UCDP staffing framework. Even though those programs are, you know, really the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's going on in the system as a whole, that we're not really designing programs that are, I don't know, perhaps they need to be more inclusive. Perhaps we need to rethink what an academic career looks like, because we tend to think of it in a, not in a linear fashion at all, but as if, you know, there's a lot of positions available. And the fact is that most postdoctoral researchers at South African universities are really just producing research rather than sort of entering academic careers, or even ever having the hope of entering academic careers. So it's just a question about what that does to professionalization.
Yeah.
Not to negate what you've just presented, of course, on the third space professionals who, you know.
Yeah, no, I got that. Kasturi, do you want to put your camera on as well so you can respond? If I can just respond to that, I think that there is more and more staff going into contractuals, in short-term contracts and fragile contracts, has to do with academic freedom and autonomy. I don't know how people meant to exercise their voice and have a critical voice if their contracts aren't confirmed, or if they're in a fragile arrangement with the university. So having more and more staff in contracts, in short-term contracts, a year or two or three, is not serving the idea of an autonomous and you know, a freedom of expression kind of university. So just to be clear that Tani, that I hear that. Kasturi, do you want to reply to her point?
Yeah, I think it's an important point, and it's a really good example of how sometimes perhaps the component parts don't talk to each other. So the precarity has a lot to do with the financial climate, nationally, at universities, etc. And often that conversation is not consonant with what we are advocating for in terms of teaching and learning, and you know, what needs to happen there to enable student success. So I absolutely agree that the professional development programs, I mean, I don't agree that all of them are not hitting the mark. I think even if you are reaching 20 people, there's some hope that you have produced the kind of scholarship that will enable other people to build on that, etc. So I think the contributions must be acknowledged to an extent. The fact that they don't take into account the varying conditions of service and how this plays out in some of the assumptions we make is something that professional developers, well, in my case, in terms of the academic staff developers, to make part of their professional, to surface it, to not ignore it, to not mask it, but to raise it as an important challenge in the way that we are offering professional development currently.
Thank you very much. I see, was it Jean Lee asking a question? I don't know if Jean Lee wants to just put your camera on for a second and ask that question.
Hi, yes, thank you. I have no idea where to switch my camera on. So if you can hear me, I'm not used to working in Zoom, but in Teams. Yes, so my concern is a long-standing concern. And I used to work in professional development, teaching and learning, and I'm now manager at the Transformation Office at the same institution. And for me, the concern has always been the missing gap between the intent of transformation and the student. And that takes us back to the academic who might be, you know, missing a gap in the knowledge, for example, if they have their professional degree in economics or whatever it is. And then also then the professional developer, the person who works in teaching, learning, assessment, who offers the opportunities for professional development to the academics. And I often see either the fear or the lack of knowledge or lack of will even very often for engagement in the deep critical transformational issues. So I've encountered people who do not want to use a student's preferred pronouns because it goes against their religion, or who does not want to speak on or hear the word rape culture even, and recognize that laughing at jokes about the way a woman student dresses doesn't see that as, you know, something that leads to rape culture. And to have those kinds of arguments with an academic is, yeah, to say that we will, you know, that if we reach 20% of people, and I have absolute respect, Kasturi, that, you know, if we reach 20% of people, you know, that's also progress. But do we in fact have another 30 or 60 years before we are reaching 30% or 40% of people, and then people retiring in the meantime? So, yeah, that's
very much for that. No, that's great. Kasturi, do you want to say, do you want to reply to that?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jean, and nice to hear your voice again. I think it's absolutely important. You know, this is again a question of how do we bring the various domains into play, you know, and for me, it's about the critical professional development. So the question, you know, it begs is the professional development program itself addressing those issues, you know, head on, in a sense, making it part of the discussion and the discourse, or is this something that happens on the sidebar? So what we do in the curriculum of the professional development is one thing, and then the conversations, and I mean, this is not to any specific example, but I think therein is the gap between the accountability and responsibility for being developed or attending those programs that claim that you have learned something. So how can we make it, and sometimes it is the language of, I don't know, you know, how do you make it an imperative for a disciplinary academic to take on board as part of a teaching project, inclusive practices? You know, that is the innovation creativity of the professional developer themselves. And I can't, you know, you can't convert the masses, let's put it that way. I think herein also lies our personal commitment to change and transformation. I don't think we can, yeah. So it's very difficult territory because we are all contextualized human beings, or not just human beings anymore. You've got lots of AI note takers in the room as well. So it's just about being vigilant and that accountability. I think we've got no more time for people to not, you know, make good.
So if I want, I need to close off in about a minute, and I want to use Jermaine's point that was made here about the different groupings at university. And I do think that that works against student success, the way we segregate and speak about certain domains are servicing students, certain domains like student affairs, you know, is positioned as a service to rather than an integrated part. As a core function for student success. Student affairs is an absolutely core and vital part of student success. And the teaching and learning as well sometimes are positioned outside of the teaching domain. Student affairs, teaching and learning experts, of course, are part of the culture of teaching at university and they need to be deeply integrated. So it is now time. I need to close off. Professor Behari-Leak, thank you very, very much for your time. It was an absolute pleasure. And we know there is a book coming out on the incredible work you've done across the last 5 years on a national level. And everybody's very excited to join you for that book launch towards the end of the month. Thank you very, very much, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Birgit, and everyone.
Thank you very, very much for having so many people here today. Thank you all for making the time. And we will all see you again in about a month's time. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Actually, can you pop me and Kasturi into a real room? Prim is also here. Hi, Prim. Saw her.
Hi.
Patrick, can you pop me and Kasturi into a room?
Not really. Hold on. I think everyone's leaving. Go and get a room, you two.
I'm going to start putting people into a waiting room. I think that might help a bit.